And now, the First Alert Storm Team, live from the 13 Now digital desk. This is Tropic Topics, sponsored by Peden Heating and Air Conditioning and Mariana Toyota.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for another episode of Tropic Topics. I'm meteorologist Kristen Kennedy here with meteorologist Grace Thornton, and we are here to break down what we are and aren't seeing in the tropics right now, and also have a quick little lesson on something that's pretty important when it comes to tropical systems. Grace, you want to start us off?
Yeah, so like we were saying, what we are seeing and what we aren't seeing, a lot of it is what we aren't seeing. There are a couple of our tropical upper tropospheric troughs out there.
Good job, Grace.
Round of applause.
Round of applause.
I said that. But those actually aren't really what we're looking at. If we look at our water vapor over towards that western area of Africa, we do have some moisture out there, but as you can see, it's not really, there are no interests. We're not watching anything there, not really tropical waves. It's really because of all this, you see that massive thing of dry air.
Yellow blob.
Yeah, that big yellow blob. That's a lot of dry air out in the Atlantic, which is related to Saharan dust, actually. If you look, it's kind of making its way westward across the Atlantic, and most of that kind of like equator, just north of the equator area, that's when that's the kind of our main development region for hurricanes or for those tropical waves that we would be watching kind of this time of year. But right now, as you can see, that dust really travels all the way over to the Yucatan Peninsula into the western areas of the Florida Peninsula, and even you see a little blob over there in Arkansas. So it does really traverse its way pretty well across the area, and that dry air is going to be kind of an inhibiting factor for any tropical waves that even do come off the west side of Africa over the next few weeks. And we're also, as we talked about last week, or you guys talked about last week, that MJO, we're in a suppressed phase of that, so that's also an inhibitor, and we've got some wind shear out there. You know, there's lots of things out there that are really just not going to make it possible for a ton of hurricane activity or development of tropical activity even over the next few weeks. So we're still kind of in this small phase of a little break time that's good for everybody, especially during hurricane season. So yeah, we still got complaining. Yeah, not complaining. We still have until probably beginning to mid-August for these things to start slowly changing. We've got our other Saharan dust forecast here. If we, give it a little fast forward through the next few days, that large darker area, that's kind of the highest concentration of dust, just continuing to traverse its way into the Caribbean and over towards even as far westward as Mexico, and even into even southwestern United States. So not really, it's really just going to keep us dry, as it should. It is dusty and dry.
Yeah, that's a good thing. We certainly like to see that this time of year. Now, we do have just the smallest quote-unquote tropical wave.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not really that tropical. You can see it here, just a little bit of a disturbance off the east coast, really more so in somewhat of the center of the Atlantic. National Hurricane Center, of course, and us watching this right now, it does not have any threat to land. It's only given a 10% chance of formation within 2 to 5 days, and we'll be watching this and seeing if it ends up going anywhere. But what we actually have across the Midwest right now is a cold front, and I think what's going to happen is this tropical wave is probably going to get swept up with that cold front and pushed further out into the Atlantic as we head into the weekend and then early next week. So we're not anticipating anything to come from this little disturbance at this time. And as Grace has just shown, we have a lot of dust all across the middle Atlantic and through the Caribbean, as well as the Gulf of Mexico. So really within the next week or two, we're not going to be seeing too much going on with the tropics. We are still pretty early on in the season, though. We typically get a spike in activity as we head towards later August and even into September. So we'll certainly be watching for that. Meanwhile, since the last time we've talked to you about a week ago, we've seen our Gulf water temperatures increase about another degree right now.
1 degree, just one more.
Just 1 degree, which doesn't seem like a lot, but the Gulf is warming up, and that is one thing that tropical systems really do love, is that warm water, that tropical moisture that does aid in development, not inhibit it. it's bad for us. It's good for the hurricane. So we're going to be watching these temperatures continue to climb. Thankfully, though, we do have that drier air and dust in store, as well as wind shear to help inhibit those tropical systems from trying to form at this time. But again, rising Gulf waters, something to keep an eye on, as tropical systems really do feed off of that warm and moist air. Here we go.
Yeah.
Here's a look at where we are in the tropical season. You can tell we have not even hit the peak of the season just yet. In fact, if you look in through about June, that's when we had Claudette come around, so that actually was pretty on par, or at least average, for what to experience that time of year. Right now, we're starting to see an uptick on average in tropical activity. Obviously, though, there's nothing going on at this moment and not expected through at least the end of July. However, heading into mid-August and then more so by the middle of September is when we typically see the most tropical activity, and it stays pretty elevated until about November. And again, the tropical season does come to an end in the month of November, but that doesn't mean tropical weather just completely stops. It can occur after that. So we are slowly getting towards a busier time of the hurricane season, but at this time, thankfully, we are not seeing too much going on out there.
Yeah, and it's sort of like an exponential rise.
Yes.
So when it does get here, it gets here quickly.
To be busy, yes.
Yeah. So yeah, definitely just be weather aware in the next coming weeks, because it could change kind of on a dime, and then we're really into it, and it will get busy. So
yeah. So take advantage of the little break we have going on now. Do you want to talk about the different tracks? So if there's going to be anything forming this time of year, we have a breakdown of where exactly that system may go based off of different conditions, and Grace is going to break this down for us.
Yeah, so our first one is kind of related to our Central American gyre. If one of those does develop once again, sort of just a broad area of low pressure that would develop southward of Cuba and the Yucatan Peninsula. We've got some general it's in the Gulf, it's in the Caribbean, so there's warm water there, and as it develops kind of within that area of, well, there's kind of a moderate to high shear at the moment, but if that shear does lower down and that dust kind of like weans off just a little bit to the eastern edges, that is where we get kind of the greatest potential for favored tracks at this time of year. So this is our first track, and it will likely start to the south of Cuba and make its way anywhere towards, the Gulf Coast region, even towards Louisiana and Texas. Don't know why I couldn't put my finger on
that other big state.
Yeah, that other big one. And into Texas. This is what we saw with, I think, one of our storms, or maybe just we had an interest here a couple, maybe during June.
I was going to say, Claudette kind of took a similar path, but it was more so towards the west, and then it curved a little bit to the east. And then I guess you could say Elsa kind of took a little bit of a similar path to that, but
Elsa was kind of like this next favored track, B. For this region, that's kind of we usually see the hurricanes develop in the sort of like equatorial area off the coast of Africa. That's how Elsa started, made its way all the way westward into the Caribbean, and kind of took that eastern curve over towards, it did end up on the west side of Florida, as you all know, but it takes that eastern curve as it follows those trade winds out to the Atlantic. So that's sort of our second area of development around.
And also that subtropical high really steered Elsa. So that's why we saw Elsa kind of go a little bit towards the west, but then it took like a hard curve in through the Big Bend and all the way up, say, the East Coast. And that was all driven by that subtropical high, which has a big impact on some of these shifts as well.
Mm-hmm. And our next one.
Get the computer.
I know. The computer's in the studio, so it's a little slow. But yeah, just these favored tracks again. They tend to curve more out to sea, but they can go up the East Coast, as we did see Elsa go up into the Carolinas and the Mid-Atlantic as well. They definitely got their fair share of rough waters and wind along with that. And our development region C is in the Central Atlantic and Eastern Caribbean. This is kind of our last area, kind of more unfavorable, but not completely out of the wheelhouse of development. We do see some minor kind of waves come out of the northeastern side of South America, but it's not too common, but it does happen. And even with track A, if we have development coming out of sea, it moves into the southern Caribbean. It could even take those tracks all the way up to the Gulf Coast and towards Texas and Louisiana as well. So kind of all can play a role. It kind of all can connect together as well.
Yeah, so we'll be watching these areas definitely as we head into the next coming weeks and months for tropical development. It's really, I would say, by August and September, we see more of a pattern of those waves actually coming from Africa and like staying and holding out through the Atlantic and then making their way to the Caribbean and into, say, the Gulf or up the East Coast. That's where we typically watch for the strongest development. In the meantime, though, it'll be typically around the Gulf or the East Coast, Caribbean, and possibly through parts of northern South America that we get some of those tropical waves to come through. So we're going to go ahead and head into our lesson for the day. It's our tropical quadrant breakdown, and we actually do have a little contest going on Facebook this afternoon. We are doing a hashtag contest similar to last week. If you can come up with a weather-related hashtag, share it in the comments. If it's funny, creative, we will be giving a shout out to whoever has the I guess the most entertaining one. So make sure you leave your comments, of course, in our comment section. And if you have any questions, also be sure to write them in because we will be discussing and answering those questions at the end of our show. So this graphic's a little bit busy. We're going to break it down first, starting with the quadrants, and then we'll talk about what's going on with those different, say, X and Y axes. So we're going to start on the top right, which is the northeast labeled side of the storm. So imagine there's a circle around this, but the top right side of it, of a tropical storm or a hurricane, is what we typically consider the strongest part of the storm. Not only do you have forward motion, typically in the same direction of the storm, but you also have a lot of strong winds in this area. You typically see the most tornadoes, wind damage, and storm surge in the front right or northeast quadrant. So if we're ever talking about a tropical system, it's potentially making landfall, you're probably going to hear us talking about the quadrants. We're going to say the front right, the northeast quadrant. Sometimes they're numbered. We're not going to number them because I think it'd be a little too confusing to keep track of that. So the front right is always the most dangerous. It's usually the one that's the worst. It's usually creating the most damage and the biggest and highest concerns when it comes to all impacts of the storm system. The one just below it, the southeast quadrant, which is the right bottom quadrant, is where we see a main concern for flooding and tornadoes. With the outer rain bands especially, we get spin-up tornadoes to occur, and it's also typically where there's just a large feeder band of heavy rainfall that leads to very significant flooding and some real flooding emergencies. We're talking about the kind of flooding that can literally sweep your house up and shift it, and it's a very, very bad situation. Now, with the dry air that can sometimes come into play, believe it or not, they actually help to produce tornadoes by giving a little bit of a more I'm trying to think of the word, indiscrete kind of formation with tornadoes. And they also can run almost stationary in that section, which is why the flooding is so prevalent and why tornadoes are most frequently seen. Because yes, the rain bands are moving, but because they're training, there's so much occurring over the same area for such a long time. This is where we see those biggest concerns. Just towards the left there, that's the southwest or the left bottom quadrant, I guess you could say. This is probably, quote unquote, the best place to be in a storm if you're lucky enough to be in this area, because there's not a lot of impacts with it. In this area, we typically have dry air coming into the storm and helping cut off all of that precipitation and those big concerns. You'll sometimes have wind shear occurring in this area too. That also just kind of helps to rip apart the system, especially as it starts to move over land. And just towards the north of that, we have the northwest or the front left quadrant. And that's also another big concern when it comes to flooding. It's maybe not as potentially impactful as the southeastern quadrant, but you can still have significant flooding on the front side of the storm, and wind in this direction is also going to be impactful, it's going to be usually an opposite direction of the northeast side, but it can still cause a lot of storm damage with trees and houses being destructed. And it can also increase the friction and lead to higher rainfall rates, but slower wind speeds overall. So there's a lot to digest in this. We're going to break it down also by showing you some different pictures and talking about different hurricanes and their impacts in the area also. But take note, northeast, southeast, southwest, northwest. These are the quadrants that we typically discuss, and you'll hear it a lot when we break down any hurricanes or tropical systems coming to impact us. The northeast side, or front right, typically the worst, not the best you want to be in. Why is that? We have these two arrows on the map, or on this graphic here. The one that goes from bottom to top is the direction of the storm, that the storm itself is moving. So if you have, say, a hurricane tracking north, the northeastern side is where you're going to have not only the forward motion of the storm, everything's going north, but you also have the strongest winds in that area as well. So you're kind of hit with the double whammy of typically the strongest and most destructive storms on the northeastern side of the storm system. Now you see that middle arrow pointing towards the circle, that's the eye of the storm, which is very important to point out because it does not matter which quadrant you're in. If you are anywhere near the eye and the eye wall, you are going to get hit very hard with the strongest winds. You're going to get very intense rainfall at the same time, probably some flooding, and it's also where storm surge is going to be the most significant. So keep in mind these different areas, these different quadrants of the storm, but also remember that that rule kind of goes out the window if you're anywhere near or around the eye.
And another thing to think about too is sometimes like we've been talking about with some of our most recent tropical storms, we were on that western side, kind of the far western side of Elsa. That's why we didn't feel those overwhelming impacts that the people did on the eastern and northeastern and even southeastern side. And also, you take into effect some of these tropical storms that we've just been tracking this year have been pretty lopsided in their motion. So those northeastern areas really had the most winds, the most rain, and the western sides, because they're so lopsided, really had not a ton of impacts, especially if you're in those western quadrants that have lesser impacts just overall. So,
and another reason why you have that drier air and usually less of an impact on the west side is because you have drier air typically coming in from the north because of this kind of counterclockwise airflow that goes around these tropical systems. So with all of these tropical lows, if you imagine a clock, you know, clocks go clockwise, but if actually all the winds are going to go the opposite direction. And that's why you get the strongest winds on the right side, because everything's pushing towards the north along with the forward direction of the storm. And on the west side, you have an opposite wind that usually comes from the northeast and goes down towards the southwest. And that northwesterly wind typically brings in some drier air from wherever it is. It's usually not very helpful in aiding with the moisture. You typically have a southerly component on the right side that's going to help feed the moisture in, which is why you have all the flooding concerns, the stronger rain threat in those areas compared to the west side, which is certainly what we saw with Tropical Storm Claudette and also with Elsa. All the rain was on the right side, the left side, which we were lucky and didn't have much going on. Now with Claudette, we did, of course, have those rain bands coming in across the panhandle of Florida in June. Thankfully, though, we didn't have too much of a flooding concern as it was a weaker storm, but yeah, definitely the right side is usually just not a good side to be
during
on.
Claudette, though, that's when we had our little sleepover. During Claudette, we had to watch for those feeder bands that were producing.
We did have
not tornadoes, but
we
almost
had a few tornado warnings.
Almost tornadoes.
Have any confirmation of them, but yeah.
Exactly. So we're going to take you through just some scenarios of these types of storms and lay out that quadrant over some of our, more famous major hurricanes in the area. This one is Hurricane Katrina, which famously went ashore southeastern Louisiana. As you can see, we kind of situated that quadrant where it was going to. Is kind of headed towards into the northeastern or northwestern, headed northwestern. So we kind of situate the quadrant around it. That northeast quadrant is really what came ashore, areas of southeast Louisiana and towards Mobile and that southern edge of Alabama as well. This is where you can see the majority of those winds within. And obviously towards that eye is where you'll see the greatest winds, 110 to 120 miles per hour. And as you gauge out just a little bit, you'll see those start to minimize, but still the major winds over towards Gulfport and southerly winds from Lake Pontchartrain there. That's what caused the majority of that storm surge, and that flooding, that southerly component of those winds is what caused all that flooding in New Orleans because of all of that lake that is just to the north there.
Yeah, so if that lake wasn't there, the flooding in New Orleans probably wouldn't have been as bad, but because there were such strong winds across that area, it basically took all the water from the lake and pushed it on shore to essentially completely flood New Orleans. So that's also another thing to note. That's technically the northeast and the northwest quadrant, the top right and top left, and in both of those areas is where wind is still a concern, even though we typically, because of forward motion, have the strongest on the right side, as you see there, with more purple, anywhere from far east, southeastern Louisiana up through parts of southern Mississippi with about 100, I believe it was 120 or so mile per hour winds. Yeah, that's all basically the right quadrant. The right front quadrant, but the left still had significant winds that caused quite significant flooding across much of southeastern Louisiana, including New Orleans, which was, I mean, really historic in those areas.
Yes. You take into consideration all the quadrants and everything like that, but also you do have to take into consideration the geography of the area, and that's why Katrina was so disastrous in New Orleans. This one is Hurricane Ivan. This struck a little closer to home. We're taking it into that northeastern quadrant, which is where we saw tons and tons of I guess these would be confirmed tornadoes during that area.
Confirmed tornadoes,
and the clicker is becoming a ghost. I don't know why that went forward. But next is Hurricane Harvey, and as you can see, put that quadrant overlaid onto it.
So you have to think of the quadrant in the direction that the storm's moving. So I know in our first graphic it was straight up 90-degree angles perpendicular, looking at it straight on, but you actually have to shift it based off the motion of the storm. So this hurricane obviously was moving towards the northwest, which is why there's a little bit of a shift when it comes to where exactly those quadrants line up. So that's also another thing to keep in mind when we are looking at these tropical systems from the past and also heading into the future as well. You really have to consider the storm motion and where it's going, and then think about where the quadrants are and the geography around it.
Yes, exactly. So Hurricane Harvey, we've overlaid the quadrant there. It was on its way northwest. So we have overlaid it, that northeast side where you see Victoria and the northernmost parts of Corpus Christi. This was really hard hitting for Rockport, Texas. Actually, you can see they had a ton of kind of estuary and bay areas there as it did come ashore. And Hurricane Harvey is actually a very specific storm in itself, as it did make its way back out into the Gulf and then headed towards the Mississippi Valley as well.
Yeah, this one was dealing with kind of like a stalled out boundary just off towards north, which made it go almost essentially nowhere. And if you remember, I believe it was like raining over this area for a week. And we're not just talking about regular rain, we're talking about moderate to heavy rain almost at all hours of the day, which led to catastrophic flooding that I don't think this area has seen in maybe ever.
Yeah.
I mean, it was, I don't think they use Harvey for a name anymore. I think it retired.
I think it was retired, yeah.
And with it came the significant winds as well. Most of this being, again, on the front right side, the northeastern quadrant, where you can see the strongest winds around 130 to almost 160 miles per hour, which, I mean, that's basically like tornado strength.
Yes.
That's like a strong high-end tornado, but over a larger area than a typical tornado would cover. So these hurricanes obviously I think they were taken seriously at the time. They should be taken seriously always, and you should always consider the potential damage and how you need to prepare for it. Here's the path, which is very interesting.
Yeah, very interesting path. And as it, made its way out into the Gulf, again, that area of Houston that got so much detrimental and historical flooding, League City, Lake Jackson, and over towards Beaumont as well. That kind of shift of the storm, the eye of the storm just passing to the east, that kept the coastline on those northern and northeastern sides of the storm for a good bit. And as we were saying, it was raining there for a very long time, like a week or so, because of that stalled boundary. So 30 to 40 inches of rainfall, that is extremely historical. That's like not normal at all.
What you get in a year and put it in a week.
Exactly. So yeah, definitely very historical and detrimental hurricane for this area. I think Hurricane Harvey is our last situation that we were going through. So if we would
I think that wraps up our show.
Yeah.
If there's any questions that you may have, please feel free to write them into our comment section on Facebook. If you can think of a quick hashtag to share with us, so weather related.
I think I saw one in here.
We have our tropic like it's hot, which is like drop it like it's hot. I've seen it's raining men.
I'm really not good at it. Like I wish I was better. I was more creative at it.
Pour some Saharan dust on me.
Yeah.
I don't know. Just thinking of like
just thinking of all the tropical things you can.
I don't know. Let's see. We'll go through the comments and see if there's any more.
Spencer, we got anything?
There's a couple on yours, Kristen.
On mine?
Yeah.
Where?
No, that's the one.
Alyssa Hormimoto, sorry if I said that wrong, says, it's gonna rain like this for days. What's that song from? Do you know that? I know it's Raining Men, because that's a classic. I don't think you even need to change the title on that. Let's see. Anyone else?
Here, let's see if I have any. No, I don't have any comments.
Oh, no one's giving Grace any love today?
Nope.
Can you think of any on the spot, Grace? What's a popular song right now?
I don't know. I feel like I have to go to like my top 40.
Now she's like, let me go look at my
look at the top 40
list. What did your brother say?
Oh, well. Oh, I get my peaches out in Panama, but that wasn't.
But not peaches. What
I showed my brother. I did tweet about this on my Twitter, but I recently registered my car in Florida, so I had to get a new license plate, and I sent a picture of it to my brother. And there's a popular song by Justin Bieber right now where he sings, I get my peaches out in Georgia. So my brother said, I get my peaches out in Panama, and I said, those are oranges.
You say, I get my oranges out in Panama?
Yeah.
I get a lot out in Panama. We have Wendy Davis says greased lightning. That's a good one. Mm-hmm. Like greased lightning. Go greased lightning. You can just do the whole dance with it too? No, that's not what this is for. Alrighty. I don't know. I think that's going to do it for us today. If you can come up with one, Grace can give you a shout out on the news tonight.
Sure.
If you come up with some creative ones and leave it in our comments. And whatever you don't use, I can shout out in the morning.
And you guys can direct message us anytime on all of our pages if you come up with a good one.
So be sure to follow the little @signs, Twitter, Facebook.
Yeah. I'm the same on everything, so you should be able to find me pretty easy.
Well, there you go. Thank you guys all for joining us. We hope you learned a little fun facts about the tropical systems. And again, if you just joined us or you're late to join us, this will be available to watch over and over, however many times you would like, on our website. And we also have archives from all of our previous videos. I know we did use some tropical terms that maybe if you were just joining us today, you might not be very much so aware of what we're talking about, but we've broken down literally everything that we mentioned today in our previous videos. So be sure to head over to our website to check those out and get the brief synopsis on what exactly all of our tropical data looks like at this time. Thankfully, though, we're not seeing much out there for now. We hope we can hang on to that dry weather as long as possible, but if anything does arise, the First Alert Storm Team will be the first to update you.
Yep, the first to update you. First
all right.
to know.
Thank you guys. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you for watching Tropic Topics, sponsored by Peden Heating and Air Conditioning and Marietta Toyota. Be sure to download the StormTrack 13 app today to stay up to date with all of the latest weather information. For more local news, weather, sports, and more, visit mypanhandle.com.